Hey everyone, I just wanted to take a quick moment or two of your time to let you know that I now have a Facebook. I'm quite late to the party, however, if you are a regular viewer of the channel or just want to keep more up to date with future uploads, then be sure to go over and give it a like. Also, I'll be attending the World Championships in San Francisco, so I'll try and post some pictures on there if you'd like to keep posted with my journey. Otherwise, thank you for your time and on to the video. Hey YouTube, this is PokéCastXVll here, and today, with Worlds approaching, we'll be taking a look and discussing what I believe to be the top 10 decks for the World Championships 2016. The format this year will be using sets from X and Y all the way up to Steam Siege, which allows for an extremely large pool of cards to choose from. Again, this information is hypothetical, however, they've been taken from recent results in the US, as well as looking at how the new cards from Steam Siege impact the current metagame. One final thing to mention before we get started is that this video will feature on the ProPokemon website, so if you'd like to check them out, as well as other articles to help you further your game, then be sure to do so at www.propokemon.com. I'll leave a link in the description box below. With all that said, let's begin. Number 10. At number 10, we have DARKRAI Giratina. This deck has come quite late into the format, but has proven to be a solid contender at US Nationals, going all the way to the top 4. DARKRAI's new engine lies in Max Elixir, where you aim to stack a load of energy onto your DARKRAI and then hit with Dark Pulse, dealing 20 damage plus 20 more for every darkness energy attached to your Pokemon. Then comes your secondary attacker in Giratina EX, which can utilize double dragon energy. Since this gives your dragon Pokemon 2 of every energy, it immediately bumps up DARKRAI's Dark Pulse by 40 damage. Other Pokemon you can also choose to play in the deck include Hydreigon EX for its ability, which gives your Dragon-type Pokemon -2 retreat when a stadium is in play. It also has a decent attack in Shred, which gets through things like Jolteon EX, and of course Latios EX for the cheap donk should it ever occur. DARKRAI has a really solid matchup against Trevenant since it does hit it for weakness, however, unfortunately for DARKRAI, Steam Siege hasn't been too kind to him. Having Giratina EX in the past gave you a perfectly viable out to Night March since you would be able to lock down their stadiums and special energies, however, the release of Pokemon Ranger means that they're able to reverse all the effects that have been applied to them. What's worse is not being under any form of item lock means that they can easily recover Pokemon Ranger with Puzzle of Time or VS Seeker and continue tanking down your big EXs, creating an unfavourable prize exchange. It's a deck that I still do like a lot, however, only in a specific metagame do I think we'll see DARKRAI succeed. Number 9. At number 9 we have Jolteon Glaceon. This is another deck that we saw piloted at US Nationals very briefly. The deck aims to lock down your opponent's attacking options by having Jolteon to lock down basic Pokemon and Glaceon to prevent evolutions. You have different ways to build the deck, including Rainbow Energy to compensate both types and Max Elixir to speed up your attacking options, however, this does require you to run basic energy. What this deck does gain from Steam Siege is the use of Ninja Boy. Ninja Boy allows you to switch out a basic Pokemon for another, however, any cards attached to the Pokemon including energy, tools, and other things like damage and special conditions all remain the same. When your Pokemon are utilizing Rainbow and Double Colorless Energy, this gives the deck a lot more freedom to change into whatever best suits your situation. Also, not forgetting that you can also put your Shaymin EXs back into the deck to prevent cheap KOs. Again, where this deck struggles is with the release of Pokemon Ranger, as reversing the effects of both Jolteon and Glaceon allows your opponent to deal damage to your Pokemon. One potential fix is running a Vileplume line, as locking your opponent out of items can prevent them from recovering Pokemon Ranger once it's in the discard. However, will it be too clunky to fit all of this into a single deck? We'll have to wait and see. Number 8. Coming in at number 8 we have Fighting. In a generic fighting deck, your main attackers usually consist of Zygarde EX, Lucario EX, and Carbink. You have two choices when playing Carbink, however, the Safeguard Carbink is usually your preferred copy. Post that, you then have the option of playing Carbink Break, which acts as a great form of energy recovery and acceleration. Fighting decks in general are quite solid with Karina still in the format and extremely hard hitting, however, it does struggle with decks like Night March, especially if they're playing Vespiquen, as both your Lucario and your Zygarde have quite common weaknesses. To tackle this, you have two options. The first is playing something like Focus Sash as a means to not having your fighting Pokemon one-shotted. If you're going down this route of playing a faster deck, then perhaps Landorus from Furious Fist could be a viable option, as it attacks off just a single energy while adding a form of energy acceleration. The second option, much like Jolteon Glaceon, is adding a Vileplume line into the deck. This play was seen briefly at the US National Championships, where a player playing Fighting Vileplume would set up a Vileplume and then continue to tanking down whatever was in the opponent's active spot with Zygarde EX, leaving your opponents with very little to work with as they weren't able to play any item cards. Again, a deck that I'm sure we'll see play in some form or another. However, will it feature on the higher end of the tables? We'll have to wait and find out. Number 7. At number 7, we have Seismitoad Giratina. This deck strength comes in Seismitoad's Quaking Punch, and where in doing so, your opponent can't then play any item cards the following turn. Once under item lock, your main target is to wear down your opponent's resources by spamming multiple cards such as Crushing Hammer, Xerosic, and Team Flare Grunt. In doing so, it leaves your opponents with very little to work with. One of the deck's downfalls is that Seismitoad's Quaking Punch only hits for 30 damage, however this can be bumped up through cards such as Fighting Fury Belt and Muscle Band, which is where Giratina also comes into play. Chaos Wheel not only offers a different form of disruption by blocking stadiums, tools and special energy, but it also hits for a solid 100 damage. It also does pretty decently against Mega Pokemon with its ability, Renegade Pulse. Going into the Steam Siege format, Seismitoad both benefits and is hurt by the release of Pokémon Ranger. Having access to Pokémon Ranger gives you an out to Jirachi, a perfectly viable counter until now which saw a lot of play in decks considering it was splashable for just a single energy. However, it also hurts Seismitoad quite a bit as decks like Night March can completely reverse the item lock, or if you're leading with Giratina, the ability to play special energy and stadiums again. Unfortunately, Giratina looks like it's lost its place in the format. However, a possible out if you are leading with Seismitoad is to play a heavy count of red card, as locking down your opponents out of VS Seekers will mean that they're unable to recover Pokémon Ranger. Should they find means to recover it through VS Seeker, you can then proceed to use something like another red card or an N to continue disrupting them further. While you do run only special energy and opening the door to being quite suspectable, you do have Puzzle of Time if you choose to play it, to recover any energy necessary. It's a deck that, despite taking second spot at this year's US National Championships, still seems to be going under the radar, but I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest to see a Seismitoad deck doing well at the tournament. Number 6. Up at number 6, we have a Water Toolbox deck. This deck's become quite popular as of late, mainly because of its versatility. Depending on what matchup it is, you can lead with whatever attacker suits your position. Generic water Pokemon you'd usually run in the deck include Regice for EX Pokemon, Articuno for low HP Pokemon to allow you to take 2 prizes, Glaceon EX for evolutions like Trevenant and Vespiquen, and Manaphy EX for the free retreat, not forgetting that it has a pretty useful attack against most Trevenant decks. Since you run Hooper EX to search out your big EXs, the option of Aegislash EX for Vespiquen Vileplume is also a possibility. Post that, your main acceleration within the deck, much like DARKRAI, is with Max Elixir to bump up the energy onto your bench Pokemon, as well as having Energy Switch to manipulate the energy in any way you please. Again, we keep coming back to that card Pokémon Ranger, which shows how impactful this card will be on the upcoming metagame. But again, it can be used to reverse the effects of something like Quaking Punch, as well as some of your attacks on Glaceon and Regice. While this can be problematic, Seismitoad's emphasis in this deck is more on Grenade Hammer, which Rough Seas utilizes extremely well, rather than Quaking Punch. With a lot of players teching Vespiquen into their Night March decks, Seismitoad can in most cases be easily one-shotted. Only time will tell as to whether any water variants will make a showing at this year's event. Number 5. At number 5, we have Greninja. This deck hasn't seen too much play recently, however, what it does have going for it is that it can make a late game comeback and is extremely strong once set up. The concept of the deck is pretty simple. You have Frogadier, which allows you to use water duplicates to search out from your deck 3 more Frogadiers. Once you have Greninja set up, you can then go into its break form, which has the ability Giant Water Shuriken. When Greninja is in the active spot, you can discard a water energy to deal 60 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. Keeping in mind that Greninja has free retreat, so you can, if having 2 of them set up, deal 120 damage before you've even attacked. This is great at taking cheap prizes on things like Shaman EX, or even softening up a big EX in your opponent's active spot. The most common Greninja to play in the deck is the one released in Breakpoint, as Shadow Stitching and Moonlight Slash are both very solid attacks. However, you can also choose to play the Greninja from the X and Y base set for an additional 30 snipe. And finally, you have Fisherman to recover basic energy and continue to keep using your giant water shurikens. Of course, going first is seen as a huge advantage with this deck, as you want to be evolving sooner rather than later. If you do go second, you have a few options. The first is Froakie's Bubble Attack, which on a coin flip can paralyze your opponent, preventing them from attacking. The second is playing Wally, as evolving on your first turn will immediately allow you to play water duplicates. Since this deck does have a hard time against Vespiquen Vileplume, most generic Greninja decks will usually play a Giratina or two, and since they probably won't be playing Pokemon Ranger, it should slow them down quite significantly. If they are teching Vespiquen in their Night March decks, then unfortunately it can be quite tough to tackle, as they'll be one-shotting your stage 2 breaks, while you're left KOing just their stage 1s. And finally, the biggest threat to the deck of course is Hex Maniac. This deck heavily relies on having abilities, and not having access to your giant waters can certainly hinder this deck a lot. It's certainly a deck that I can see making a comeback at this year's event, but will it be able to go all the way? We'll have to wait and find out.
Number 4.
At number 4, we have Yveltal ZOROARK. What this deck has going for it is that it probably has one of the best second turns within the format. There are various ways in which you can choose to play this deck. Some include ZOROARK Break, and others will go down the Yveltal EX route. However, the stem of the deck comes in Yveltal, which has the attack Oblivion Wing, dealing 30 damage and acting as a form of energy acceleration in the process, if you have an energy in your discard pile. With Yveltal being reprinted in Steam Siege, you also have the option of Yveltal Break as another option should you choose to play it. Since you run double colourless energy anyway, this deck utilises Druddigon from Flash Fire extremely well, which has the Revenge attack. Revenge deals 20 damage, however, if one of your Pokemon was knocked out from your opponent's attacks the last turn, then it deals an additional 70 damage, totaling 90. This adds up perfect numbers, knocking out a Vespiquen, and with a Muscle Band hits 110, KOing both Trevenant and Shaman EX to name a few. You've got Yveltal from Breakthrough with the Fright Knight ability, if you want to disrupt your opponents from playing any tools. On top of that, it does have the nice snipe damage on your opponent's benched EX Pokemon, and of course your last option in the deck is playing the whole Maxis and Gallade combo, which adds a lot of consistency to the deck once in place. In terms of matchups, Yveltal in the deck is your go-to against Night March, as it hits perfect numbers on both Joltik and Pumpkaboo, assuming they have no Fighting Fury belt attached, which creates a prize for prize KO scenario. It does have an extremely positive matchup against Trevenant, since it hits for weakness and has a pretty decent matchup against most other things in the format. It's certainly a deck that I would be prepared for, and one that I'm sure will do quite well at the tournament.
Number 3.
At number 3, we have Vespiquen Vileplume. This deck going first can beat anything within the format. By using cards such as Battle Compressor, Trainer's Mail and Ultra Ball to search out your Shaman EXs, your goal is to feed through your deck while shifting a load of unnecessary Pokemon into the discard pile, bumping up Vespiquen's B-Revenge. You have Forest of Giant Plants, which allows you to evolve your Grass Pokemon the same turn that you've played them, which also gets out your turn 1 Vileplume. Finalizing your turn with a Vileplume allows you to maximize your turn of using item cards and then prevent your opponent from using any themselves. At which point, Vespiquen should be hitting for high amounts of damage, 1 or 2 shotting whatever is standing in front of it. And of course, you have Unknown for its ability, Farewell Letter, to increase the damage on B-Revenge. Another card that you also have is Bunnelby, should you want to recover anything late game. Other inclusions include cards such as Floatstone, which you attach before you play down your Vileplume onto your Oddish or Gloom, giving your Vileplume free retreat so you can't be Lysander stalled, and Revitalizer to recover any grass Pokemon you had to discard with things like Professor Sycamore. You do now also have from Steam Siege Special Charge should you want to recover any special energy. Despite the various different ways of building the deck, this deck has been known to miss a turn 1 Vileplume, which gives your opponent an opportunity to prepare for the item lock. If you do run into any Aegislash-EXs, unfortunately Vespiquen has no means of getting around it, eventually leading to conceding the game. Playing something like a Hex Maniac does seem very counterproductive, however, one option that you do have is Toxicroak EX from Flash Fire, as it can attack off just a single double colourless energy. Through Poison, you can slowly take down their Aegislash-EX, putting 3 damage counters between turns. With Vileplume in play, Aegislash does have a high retreat cost, meaning they won't be able to get it out of the active spot unless they pay the retreat cost or have something like an AZ or a Cassius. It is very matchup dependent, so if it's not required, you can just Battle Compressor the card. Also, if your opponent does open up with something like a turn 1 Wobbuffet and you're going first, this can seriously hinder your chances of setting up, as it not only shuts off your Vileplume, but also your Shaman EXs, meaning you won't be able to feed through your deck as efficiently. And finally, another potential fear that you may encounter playing this deck is the possibility of decking out, since it is very common to only have less than 10 cards in your deck once your turn is over. If you do go second against the mirror, or even a deck like Trevenant that also has the option of a turn 1 item lock, then unfortunately there's not really a lot that you can do. The coin flip can be hugely significant as to how the matchups play out, which is why a lot of players choose not to play it. However, it's certainly a deck that I would be prepared for if you are heading to the World Championships.
Number 2.
Coming in at second place, we have Trevenant. This is another deck that has been seeing a lot of play all across the world at various tournaments. If you go first, you can hit a turn 1 Wally, evolving your Phantump into Trevenant. Having Trevenant for its ability Forest Curse, item locks your opponent before they've even had a turn themselves. From there you have cards like Dimension Valley to lower your attacking costs. Once Trevenant is in play, you then can evolve into its Break form, which not only bumps up its HP, but also gives you an added attack in Silent Fear. Silent Fear places 3 damage counters on all of your opponent's Pokemon and does really well against decks like Night March, as a lot of their Pokemon have really low HP. Another viable option you have in the deck is Wobbuffet, as going second still gives you an out disrupting your opponent and preventing them from using things like Shaymin EX. Wobbuffet's ability, By Barricade, prevents both players from using abilities with the exception of Psychic Pokemon. Like Trevenant, this only works if Wobbuffet is in the active spot. You can also choose to play Mystery Energy, which allows your Trevenant to retreat for just the 1 energy and gives your Wobbuffet free retreat. Wobbuffet acts as a great late game sweeper, as Psychic Assault does 10 damage plus 10 more for every damage counter on the defending Pokemon. Other ways you can accumulate more damage is by playing things like Muscle Band or even Bursting Balloon. Already being under item lock if Trevenant is in the active spot means they won't be able to get rid of the Bursting Balloons unless of course they play something like a Lysander or Xerosic. The balloons also put in a lot of work against decks like Night March with very low HP, and allows you to KO big EXs with Wobbuffet if any big EXs decide to attack you. The last thing to mention is that Phantump's Ascension, for a single energy, or even no energy at all when Dimensional Valley is in play, can evolve itself into a Trevenant, which is really useful going second, as you can't attack on your first turn. However, with all that said, Trevenant does, like every deck, have its downfalls. It does struggle quite a bit with dark decks, Yveltal being a primary example, and it can have a hard time against water decks that play rough seas, as they're able to simply heal off the damage you place on their Pokemon. With that said, you do generally run 4 Dimension Valley for this purpose, to try and keep on top of the Stadium War. Also not forgetting that most Trevenant decks usually play Delinquent, which acts as a great form of disruption as well as knocking off their Stadium. Trevenant has shown us that it has all the credentials to win an event the scale of a World Championships, but will it be able to go all the way? We'll have to wait and find out.
Number 1.
And finally, the big number 1, and at first place it should come of no surprise that we have Night March. Night March from the release of Steam Siege gets even stronger than it initially was, if that's even possible. The concept of the deck is to dump as many Pokemon with the Night March attack into the discard pile, fueling for big one-hit KOs. Depending on how you choose to build the deck, you have the Mew variant which focuses on Dimension Valley, or you have the Vespiquen route which also plays Unknown to counter decks like Greninja and Seismitoad. What Night March gains from the release of Steam Siege is the release of Pokémon Ranger. In the past, decks like Seismitoad and Giratina would both be able to lock you out of playing important resources, such as items and special energy. However, with Pokémon Ranger, you can completely reverse the effect. This was also really great against Jirachi, something which saw a lot of play against decks like Night March. This immediately takes away Giratina EX from the format as one of the deck's biggest threats, as you should always have access to Pokémon Ranger through Puzzle of Time and VS Seeker. However, even with that said, I would still expect to see Seismitoad variants lurking around. Even with Night March as strong as it's become, it still has its flaws. The most and best way to disrupt Night March is to lock them down out of items, as Night March is a heavily item focused deck. This can be done through Trevenant and Vileplume variants, although expect Night March players to be running a Pokémon Ranger or two if you are playing Seismitoad. If you do decide to go with Night March, you may want to start thinking about how to beat the mirror, as it will feature quite a lot. Cards like Target Whistle and Captivating Pokepuff are both viable examples to try and target their Shaymin EXs and to get ahead of the prize exchange. Another consideration is playing 2 Lysander, as you want to increase the chances of starting with it if you are paired against a turn 1 Trevenant or a Wobbuffet. On the slim chance should you encounter bats, you do have the option of Hexmaniac, which is also your go-to card for decks like Greninja. You may even want to consider a Parallel City, as a means to knocking off your Shaymin EXs when placed on the blue side, to prevent your opponent from taking cheap KOs with things like Lysander. Otherwise, there you pretty much have it. That is my top 10 decks for this year's World Championships 2016. If you did like this video and you would like to see more Pokemon related content, then all you have to do is click the annotations at the end of this video. There'll also be a subscribe button there as well if you would like to subscribe to the channel. Also, not forgetting that I do now have a Facebook page, so if you would like to keep up to date with the channel as well as keep on tabs with my journey going to Worlds, then be sure to go over and give it a like. And of course, if you haven't already and want to do so, be sure to check out ProPokemon.com, all the links are within the description box below. Otherwise, that leaves me to say best of luck to those attending the World Championships, and thank you for watching. I will see you all next time.